Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, back with another reaction video. Today we're finna react to top worst wrestling games of all time. Worst wrestling games of all time. From my own personal experience, Legends of Wrestling is probably the worst of the bunch, by far. Another one. If you want to count it, I don't know if you can, but I would count it. Def Jam Icon, that shit was trash. Just going through that and just recently going through it and playing that, y'all can go look that up. Is I recently just did a playthrough with P Diddy. I did a whole playthrough with Diddy. So yeah, that game was trash, bro. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Def Jam Icon is hot garbage, bro. That shit is trash, bro. The story is pretty good, but the gameplay is just the gameplay just makes it not worth it. Um then there's I want to say all of the WWE 2K games except for WWE 2K14, which I really don't count because those were still THQ games. Like THQ made those games and 2K just put their name over it and was like, yeah, we're gonna take control of y'all next two games. Y'all can still make the next two games, but it's gonna be under our imprint since THQ went under. Because that was the problem. THQ made those games, and then THQ went under. So then 2K ended up buying the WWE video games, and then they put their name over the THQ. So those first two ones, I think it was WWE 13 and WWE 2K13, 2K14. Yeah, those were THQ games. So I'm not gonna count those because those were THQ games. That's why they were still good. You know what I'm saying? Because they were THQ games. But any WWE 2K game after any WWE 2K game after 2K14, trash, garbage. They're all garbage. None of them are good. 2K has done the WWE video game landscape terrible. And it's fucked up because THQ is back now and they make games for AEW now. And I wish they would try to get the rights back to the WWE games so that way they can make the WWE games like they used to do back in the day. Cause cause 2K ain't it. 2K is terrible. 2K is a terrible company. I've hated them for many years now. Yeah, they do a terrible job with the basketball games. They do a terrible job with the wrestling games. I don't care what y'all say. Y'all can sit up here and say, "Oh, it's ridiculous." No, it's not. It'll never be as good as the old THQ video games at all. Probably another one was probably the Xbox was the Xbox wrestling games for the first Xbox, the OG Xbox. The OG Xbox first couple of wrestling games were fucking terrible. They were all terrible until they went to the Xbox 360 and got SmackDown versus Raw. Once they got SmackDown versus Raw, yeah, that was legit. But back then, fucking the Raw, and I think they had WrestleMania 21. Yeah, all them shits was trash. Yeah, that's just me. That's just me though. But anyways, though, without further ado, let's get right into this.
Wrestling video games have given us some incredible moments. Trust me, I've played all of the good ones. But then there are the ones so bad they made me question both my love of wrestling and gaming. From a game with no wrestling ring to one with no wrestling at all, let's count down the 10 worst wrestling video games ever made. WrestleMania 21 was an Xbox exclusive released in April 2005, and it was supposed to be a rival to the SmackDown series on PlayStation. It boasted revolutionary graphics, online multiplayer, and a career mode where players could rise through the ranks to WWE stardom. And for a moment, it gave Xbox players hope that they were going to get a wrestling game that was actually good. but WrestleMania 21 was not the crown jewel that it was hyped up to be. The AI was broken beyond repair, the controls were sluggish, hit detection was abysmal, and online multiplayer, which was one of the game's big selling points, was practically unplayable due to severe lag. And then there was the voice acting.
That is it! I will not stand for this a minute longer.
Renee!
Well, look who it is. Chavo Guerrero. Does this ring a bell? Eddie.
Man, you really aren't here to make friends, are you?
Unsurprisingly, WrestleMania 21 was slammed by critics and wrestling fans alike, and it marked the end of Studio Gigante, which closed its doors shortly after the game's release. And so they brought the SmackDown vs. Raw series to Xbox the following year. WCW Nitro was released in 1998 for the PlayStation, and it later made its way to PC and Nintendo 64 in 1999. It featured a roster of WCW's biggest stars, but while Nitro looked promising on paper, it had a bunch of problems. The N64 release came out much later than the PlayStation version, so that felt outdated right out of the gate, and its Nintendo release came after the far superior WCW NWO Revenge. The controls were super complicated, which frustrated players, and the AI ranged from absurdly easy to unfairly difficult. The graphics were another weak point. It looked terrible, even by PS1 standards. Add to that a huge lack of match types and modes, this ended up being one of the shallowest wrestling games of the era. Imagine a world where WWE superstars trade body slams for bumper cars and steel chairs for steel-plated vehicles. Enter WWE Crush Hour, where the squared circle is replaced by a demolition derby. It's a game that nobody ever asked for, where you could play as Steve Austin driving a monster truck or The Undertaker on a 3-wheeled chopper.
I ain't gonna lie though, this was fun to play with friends, but by yourself, whatever. But with friends, this is fun. By yourself, nah. Yeah, it was a pointless game.
The game's premise was that Vince McMahon had taken over all of the TV networks, launching a vehicle combat show featuring WWE superstars. Critics panned Crush Hour for its repetitive gameplay, lackluster graphics, and shallow mechanics. The controls were often described as clunky, where it was frustrating to drive the vehicles, and the game failed to capture the essence of WWE, apart from the fact that you were playing as wrestlers, obviously. In the end, Crush Hour became a curious footnote in WWE's gaming history, a detour into car combat that thankfully has never been attempted again. Released in 1983, Tag Team Wrestling was one of the pioneering wrestling games in arcades, and it was later ported to platforms like the NES and Commodore 64. Players controlled a tag team, battling through matches to win the Super Championship Tag Team Trophy. While this was one of the first attempts to bring the excitement of pro wrestling to the video game realm, it became dated very quickly. The gameplay is painfully repetitive with a limited moveset, and as far as the controls are concerned, let's just say you'd have an easier time pulling off a moonsault in real life. Even for the early 80s, the graphics are shockingly basic, with blocky characters and lifeless animations. This isn't just old school, it's ancient, and not in a charming retro way either. Showdown Legends of Wrestling lets you step into the ring with the greatest wrestling legends of all
garbage.
time. But this was the third in a series of terrible wrestling games. The big selling...
This shit was garbage. I don't know who kept making these, bruh. Whoever made these, bruh, every time I saw these, bruh, I promise you, every time I saw these.
For the love of God! For the love of God! Please! Damn! Damn!
Every time I saw these, bruh, I was like, they keep making these. Who keep making these? These are terrible.
point of the game was the huge roster of over 70 wrestling icons, including The Ultimate Warrior, Randy Savage, and Sting. In the days before legends were introduced to WWE games, this was a big thing, but the game had a ton of issues. Wrestlers were slow and difficult to control, and their movesets were far too limited. It was all well and good having these legends to play as, but not so good when they could only do 5 moves, especially considering that Kevin Nash wasn't in the game. And then there were glitches everywhere. Wrestlers would awkwardly clip through the ring or miss moves entirely because the collision detection was so unreliable. Showdown Star Power couldn't save it from the sloppy execution, making it extremely frustrating rather than fun. When AEW announced its first ever video game in November 2020, wrestling fans hoped for a fresh alternative to the WWE 2K series, but what they ended up with was a second-rate product. The developers said that they were aiming to capture the nostalgic feel of late 90s and early 2000s wrestling games like WWF No Mercy, but what they produced instead was a game that seemed old-fashioned in all the wrong ways. Incredibly, it took nearly 3 years after the announcement for the game to finally be released, and it felt unfinished. For starters, the roster at launch was shockingly thin, with only 47 wrestlers, and while the game promised deep customization, the options were bare bones, leaving players with limited ways to make the experience their own. The visuals didn't help either, with the graphics looking outdated and the wrestlers moving awkwardly in the ring. It looked like an amateur product compared to the WWE games, which to be fair is pretty on brand for AEW. The career mode felt underdeveloped and repetitive, and there was a surprising lack of game modes too, and to make matters worse, Fight Forever was plagued by technical issues with plenty of bugs and glitches when it was released. It was so bad to play, you didn't want to fight for 10 minutes, let alone forever. Hulk Hogan's main event for the Xbox 360 Kinect was released in 2011 and aimed to let players train under Hulk Hogan, performing wrestling moves using the motion controls. But instead of being fun, it ended up being a body slam of disappointment. The biggest issue was the Kinect itself. The motion controls were unresponsive and unreliable as they struggled to accurately detect player movements. It was almost impossible to even execute simple moves like a clothesline because the Kinect just didn't read the input properly. There was also a lot of lag between your movement and the on-screen response, which basically made the game unplayable. Beyond the controls, the gameplay itself was shallow and repetitive. Matches involved performing the same limited moveset over and over again, although to be fair, that does simulate Hogan's wrestling style pretty accurately.
Damn.
Instead of feeling like you were part of a wrestling match, it felt like you were stuck in a poorly animated workout routine. What was supposed to be a main event experience turned into an undercard level disaster. When Springfield's favourite family stepped into the squared circle, fans expected a comedic.
I ain't gonna lie, I used to love this game. This used to be a Blockbuster rental. I used to love this game as a kid. As an adult now, yeah, I completely understand why this game is fucking terrible. But back then, when I was a little kid, it didn't matter, bro. It was The Simpsons. You could beat everybody up, bro. You could beat everybody up as The Simpsons, bro. That's what I loved about this game. It was Simpson characters and he was beating everybody up. But as I got older, yes, this game is fucking terrible.
Comedic twist on wrestling. Released in 2001 for the PlayStation, the game featured 20 characters from the show, each voiced by their original actors. The biggest flaw was the gameplay. Matches boiled down to chaotic button mashing with no real strategy or skill. The game lacked traditional wrestling mechanics like grappling or reversals, making it feel more like a brawl in Moe's Tavern than an actual wrestling match. The characters had unique abilities, like Homer tossing donuts, but that quickly became repetitive. And while the original voice actors were employed here, the repetitive dialogue quickly got on your nerves. The Simpsons Wrestling failed to understand either of its inspirations. As a wrestling game, it lacked the depth and excitement that fans of the genre expected. And as a Simpsons game, it didn't deliver the humour that the series is famous for. In the dying days of WCW, Backstage Assault tried to innovate by taking the wrestling entirely out of the ring. Unfortunately, this resulted in a game that is often remembered as one of the worst wrestling titles ever released. It came out at the end of 2000 for the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 as a follow-up to the fairly decent WCW Mayhem, but instead of building on those solid foundations, they decided to get rid of the ring and the arena. One of the things that was innovative about Mayhem was the ability to go backstage. At the time, that was incredibly exciting, but it wasn't exciting enough to build an entire game around. All that we were left with was bland environments like parking lots and locker rooms, which failed to capture the energy or the spectacle of a wrestling match. The whole presentation felt cheap and rushed, although to be fair, that kind of matched the energy of WCW at the time.
Yeah.
When WWE 2K20 was released in October 2019, fans anticipated the next evolution in the long-running wrestling game franchise. But instead, they were met with a title that became infamous for its technical issues and mediocre execution. The game was developed by Visual Concepts, and this was their first WWE game, taking over from the previous developer, Yuke's. It was hoped that Visual Concepts would bring fresh ideas to the series, but it ended up being one of the most disastrous launches in wrestling game history. The game was riddled with bugs and glitches, from minor visual problems to game-breaking issues. Wrestlers' limbs bent in unnatural directions, characters fell through the ring, and animations regularly failed to play as intended. These problems were amusing to begin with, but they actually rendered the game almost unplayable. The graphics were another major letdown, with some wrestlers looking nothing like their real-life counterparts, and it all made 2K20 feel like a step backwards compared to earlier games in the series. And then there was the infamous Y2K20 bug. At the start of January 2020, the game essentially stopped functioning, crashing whenever players tried to access key features. WWE 2K20 was such a disaster that it didn't just hurt the game, it hurt the entire franchise.
And that's why WWE 2K games are terrible. Don't tell me that, oh, well, this game was actually good this year. You should have no, they're all terrible. 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 They don't match what THQ did. They will never match what THQ did. So fuck them. That's what I say. I say fuck them. But anyways, let's just go about doing it for this one, man. I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, peace out.